The Arc de Triomphe in Paris, the symbol of the fighting French people, has become a symbol of farmers' struggle against the agreement with Mercosur countries. The Mercosur agreement cannot be signed. It will open the door to unfair foreign competition for our products. We can produce enough ourselves at competitive prices. Will the protests bring results? We will find out on Friday. That is when the vote on the agreement with the Mercosur countries will take place. At the moment, there is not a sufficient blocking minority. France and Hungary have announced their firm opposition. Hungary will vote against the EU-Mercosur free trade agreement tomorrow. The EU Commission is pushing to adopt and implement a deal that would open Europe to unlimited imports of South American agricultural products at the expense of the livelihoods of Hungarian farmers. We oppose this decision, as Brussels is once again ignoring the interests of our farmers. For the agreement to be rejected, Poland would also have to be part of the blocking minority. It is unclear how the government of Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk will approach the issue. The Polish Minister of Agriculture is shifting the responsibility off his shoulders. Let's remember that it is not the ministers of agriculture who will ultimately decide whether to sign this agreement. It is also a matter for the ministers of economy and finance, who will have their say, and the prime ministers. All that was needed was to maintain the blocking minority that had existed for years, according to the opposition. In 2019, we managed to create a blocking minority with France, Ireland, Belgium, and other countries, a minority that lasted until 2024. The government in Poland changed, and so did the narrative of the European Commission, which decided to step on the gas and bring this agreement to a conclusion. The Italians are still hesitant about their opposition. However, following Wednesday's meeting of agriculture ministers in Brussels, the Italians are getting closer to signing the agreement. The Italians have already negotiated points in the agreement that will result in them receiving more money from the EU budget, and at the same time, they will decide to sign the agreement. There was a moment to talk to them, and the blocking minority was within reach. Now it's too late. Germany stands to benefit most from the agreement, as it will open up a market in South America for its own products, including those from the automotive and chemical industries. Pressure is mounting not only from the European Union and Germany. Among others, the president of Brazil is pushing for the agreement to be signed as soon as possible. Europe has not yet made a decision. Its leaders have asked for more time. However, it will not be possible for France alone to prevent the agreement from being reached. I hope that the agreement will be signed as soon as possible. The signing of the agreement could mean bankruptcy for Polish and European farmers. This is going in the direction of satisfying the interests of someone out there, the big lobbyists. I think the point is to deprive us, small farms up to 300 hectares, family farms, of this. The specific nature of Polish agriculture, and not only Polish agriculture, but also that of many Western European countries, is its family character. It is the family that makes a living from running the farm. That is why the state has a duty, not only a right, but also a duty to take care of this agriculture. After all, Polish agriculture provides us with a key aspect of the functioning of the state, food security. It is difficult to imagine a sovereign, independent country that does not have its own food, is dependent on external food, and only its own agriculture is able to provide this basic amount of food. All the more so because European farmers provide proven, healthy products due to the restrictive standards that their crops must meet. This is in contrast to producers in South America. They are not withdrawing the substances that we have withdrawn, which are carcinogenic, unhealthy, and harmful. And in a few years' time, it may turn out that many people in Poland and Europe will be ill. There is no justification for substances that are considered dangerous and therefore banned in the European Union to be tolerated in imported food products. That is why farmers across Europe have been protesting for months. In Greece, thousands of farmers have begun a 48-hour blockade of key road junctions. Polish farmers are already heading to Warsaw from all over Poland. It is in the capital, on the day of the vote on the adoption of the agreement, that their protests will culminate. We are just setting off for tomorrow's protest in Warsaw. Let's all meet there. Let's stand together to fight. Let's not die in silence. I also appeal to the president, Mr. Karol Nawrocki, to stand with us. The president is not deaf to such appeals. President Nawrocki will meet with the protesting farmers here at the presidential palace at 10 a.m. because he wants to engage in dialogue and help Polish farmers. The farmers' fate may be decided in Brussels.
Boarding the Marinera was a precise military operation, a tanker on the open sea at night that had been under surveillance by U.S. services for several days. American forces boarded a vessel linked to the circumvention of international sanctions. According to available information, the tanker was part of a transport network used by Russia and Venezuela, known as the Shadow Fleet. The crew refused to cooperate. The ship changed flags, routes, and identification systems. However, this was not enough. American special forces successfully boarded the ship. The operation ended with a complete takeover of the vessel, with no losses on the U.S. side. This was not the only such operation. Over the past 2 days, the Americans have confirmed further seizures of tankers which, according to intelligence, were involved in circumventing sanctions and financing hostile regimes and criminal structures.
The boarding of the Marinera tanker, previously known Bella 1, after it obtained the Russian flag, is a telling example. Certainly a move bound to raise tensions with Russia and risks escalation, but the Trump administration likely found that stepping back would show weakness.
It seems this operation is not a coincidence, but a clear signal to Moscow. The days of dialogue are coming to an end, and Washington is no longer making empty threats. U.S. senators have just been given the green light to introduce a sanctions bill against Putin's regime in Congress. After a very productive meeting with President Trump on a variety of issues, he greenlit the bipartisan Russia sanctions bill that I have been working on for many months with Senator Blumenthal and many others. This will be well-timed, as Ukraine is making concessions for peace and Putin is all talk, continuing to kill the innocent. This bill will allow President Trump to punish those countries who buy cheap Russian oil, fueling Putin's war machine. American politicians have no doubt. Illegal oil trade has become one of the pillars of the Russian war machine and a tool for waging hybrid warfare against the West. At the same time, the negotiations clearly show who is willing to compromise and who is only making further demands.
We need a practical mechanism that will allow these funds to truly help Ukraine. This mechanism must be designed not to create problems, of course, but to reduce the challenges we already face. And we are doing everything required on our side in the negotiation process. And we expect that no additional or excessive demands will be placed on Ukraine.
These actions are part of a broader change in U.S. policy. Washington is withdrawing from some international organizations, including the Venice Commission, which, according to the U.S., have not produced real results. The USA is limiting funding for structures considered ineffective and focusing instead on tough law enforcement, direct alliances, and power projection. To that end, the USA is building up their relationships with key allies. For example, Kristi Noem attended the CPAC conference in Jasionka, Poland, to deliver a clear message. Poland is increasingly mentioned in Washington as a key security partner, a frontline state, a pillar of the eastern flank, and a strategic ally of the United States. The seizure of tankers is a signal sent to Russia, Iran, and all the regimes evading sanctions. The United States is returning to a policy of strength, based on real actions and alliances. In this new geopolitical order, there is less room for autocratic regimes to abuse the goodwill of what seems to now definitively be the world's lone superpower, America.
Greenland, one of the most strategic locations in the Arctic Circle. This is where the interests of the United States and those of China and Russia collide. Influencing the Arctic landing in the wrong hands could be disastrous.
From a national security situation, it's so strategic. Right now, Greenland is covered with Russian and Chinese ships all over the place. We need Greenland from the standpoint of national security.
This is a map of the situation in the Arctic Circle region from the perspective of the North Pole. It clearly shows that Greenland is a buffer between hostile powers. On one side is the United States, on the other is Russia and China. The island could even be used to attack America. Rockets launched from the European coast of Russia toward the United States would fly over Greenland. That is why the Americans are keen to increase their presence, including their military presence in the region. The military presence is related to American interests in the Arctic and ensuring the security of Canada and the United States in particular. At the height of the Cold War, there were about 6,000 American soldiers stationed in Greenland, but that number has now fallen to about 200. It is not only Russian missiles that pose a threat. China is planning sea routes through the Arctic, which will shorten its route to the Atlantic, perhaps not just for merchant ships, but also for warships. Washington emphasizes, however, that the goal is not any kind of intervention in Greenland.
That's always been the president's intent from the very beginning. He said it very early on. I mean, this is not new. He talked about it in his first term, and he's not the first U.S. president that has examined or looked at how could we acquire Greenland.
However, European leaders constantly take the Greenland issue as a chance to posture. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk has announced that the issue would be raised at a meeting of the coalition of interested parties before backing down. But what is worse, Tusk then spoke about an alleged US invasion of Greenland. A member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization should not attack or threaten another member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Otherwise, NATO would lose its meaning if conflicts or other aggressive actions occurred within the pact. The very fact that Donald Tusk jumped out of the blue and began to speak critically about President Trump and his position on Greenland shows that he's either being sent out by European leaders to do what they do not want to do publicly, so as not to harm their countries, or he is overzealously trying to curry favor with the leaders of Germany, France, or other large European Union countries, which of course looks bad because no one else acts or speaks this way. Politico writes that Tusk has been put forward by Berlin and Brussels to attack Donald Trump at every opportunity, including in relation to Greenland. In this case, but also many previous ones, it is a blunt German or French tool that is sent to bludgeon the opponent. They would never do it themselves, but they can use a blunt tool like Donald Tusk. The Prime Minister of Poland should be working on issues concerning Polish national interest, like opposing the Mercosur deal and the EU migration pact. Instead, he is talking about Greenland. It's a bit strange. It looks as though he has been delegated by some forces, probably German, to attack Donald Trump, who is looking for footholds against China and Russia. Greenland is a dependent territory of Denmark, and Icelandic singer Björk writes about how Denmark has exploited this dependence over the years at the expense of the island's inhabitants. The artist claims that women living on the island in particular were treated as second-class citizens. I wish all Greenlanders blessing in their fight for independence. Icelanders are extremely relieved that they managed to break from the Danish in 1944. We didn't lose our language, my children will be speaking Danish now, and I burst from sympathy for Greenlanders repeatedly. Especially like when the case came up about the forced contraception, where 4,500 girls as young as 12 got IUD without their knowledge between 1966 and 1970. The relations between Greenlanders and Danes were quite unenviable. Women were indeed treated as a necessary evil. The Danes' experimentation was disgusting, and I don't think that they are particularly happy with this subjugation imposed by the Danes. I think they can secede at any time, because there is an agreement between Denmark and Greenland. President Trump suggests that they consider whether independence would be the best option, which Copenhagen obviously does not agree with. The final decision will be made by the Greenlanders themselves, who are well aware that their security is also at stake in the face of growing Russian and Chinese aggression. Navy, Air Force, Ground Forces, aircraft carriers, F-35 fighter jets and Apache attack helicopters, plus nearly 200 soldiers, including commandos and other special forces. The United States sent its military elite to Venezuela to crack down on Nicolas Maduro's drug business.
It was so complex, 152 airplanes, many, talk about boots on the ground, we had a lot of boots on the ground. But it was amazing. And think of it, nobody was killed, and on the other side, a lot of people were killed. Unfortunately, I say that, soldiers. Cubans, mostly Cubans, but many, many killed. And they knew we were coming.
The drug regime that terrorized the people of Venezuela and supplied deadly drugs to the United States was destroyed. The targets were military facilities and the palace of the self-proclaimed president. During the operation, the Americans used the entire spectrum of aircraft. These included L-22 combat aircraft, F-35 aircraft, F-18 aircraft, as well as numerous Special Forces helicopters, including special versions of Black Hawk and Chinook helicopters, which transported Special Forces commandos to Caracas and later evacuated them back to the ship, which is important. A very important element of the entire operation were the naval platforms, primarily the USS Iwo Jima amphibious assault ship and the Ocean Trader Special Forces support ship, which served as bases for the helicopters that transported the commandos back and forth. The US operation in Venezuela was a display of effectiveness and professionalism. The Americans used F-35 aircraft, MQ-9 drones and Apache helicopters, among other things. All these machines have been acquired by the Polish armed forces thanks to the actions of the Law and Justice government. With the help of state-of-the-art equipment, the Americans overthrew the narco-terrorist regime. The dictator, who just a few days ago was threatening the United States and amassing wealth at the expense of his own citizens and Americans, ended his reign in handcuffs, brought to justice in Manhattan, New York. The whole operation was calculated precisely to show the effectiveness of the United States. The Americans have brilliantly figured out the entire security system of President Maduro, and this was supposed to have had the effect that it did. In addition, I think that both the Russian Federation and the People's Republic of China are now concluding very nervous analyses of what the Americans have actually done, because both countries have weapons that were supposed to be used by the Venezuelan president for defense, and these weapons were quickly neutralized. The Americans not only broke Venezuela's military defenses, but also struck one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the world. Maduro not only created the Cartel of the Suns, but also drew in members of his immediate family, including his wife, who held a managerial position, as well as members of the government, the military, and officials. The criminals running the country used smuggling routes established by the Mexican drug lord El Chapo, but also sought new ways to deliver drugs to the United States, including the use of modern smuggling boats.
Elementy tego kartelu powstawały we współpracy.
Elements of this cartel were formed in cooperation with the Colombian mafia in this initial phase, which is why the Colombian-Venezuelan border was the place where this network of connections and the cartel itself began to form. Business flourished as long as the Democrats ruled the US. When Donald Trump returned to the White House, he declared war on illegal migrants, gangs, and drug smugglers. Donald Trump made it clear, if you try to destabilize the United States using these kinds of dictators, or if dictators think they can destabilize it, for example, by sending drugs, or in any other way, because there may be more such attempts to destabilize the United States or the democratic world, the response of the United States will be immediate, ruthless, and effective. This is not the end of American involvement in Venezuela, because even though the drug business has collapsed, the regime has not relinquished power peacefully. Cartel members still rule the country. That is why Donald Trump has announced that fair democratic elections will be held there under American supervision, and that US oil companies will extract oil. This time, the profits will go not to Maduro's cartel. Ordinary people will be the first to receive aid. Until then, the Americans will block tanker traffic in the Caribbean Sea and prevent Maduro's people from profiting.
Moving forward, and that is we have leverage. This leverage we are using and we intend to use. We started using already. You can see where they are running out of storage capacity. In a few weeks, they're going to have to start pumping oil unless they make changes.
Donald Trump announced that the authorities in Caracas have declared that they will transfer 30 to 50 million barrels of oil to the United States, and Washington will use the profits from its sale for the benefit of Venezuelans.